Hey, you've summoned a lesser maker. Today, I have something super exciting to show you. A company called ZVanks contacted me and they wanted to send me a laser cutter. A laser cutter is one of those machines that has been kind of on the bucket list. I've always wanted to save up and get one of these and try them out. This machine is really interesting to me. I can always improve myself, and in turn, I'm improving the tool and making better things with it. And that's one of the main reasons I've always wanted one of them. I'm gonna evaluate whether this is good for my work area, whether I recommend it to you. We're gonna build something simple today. If by the end of this episode you're interested in this machine, there is a link in the description as well as a promo code for you to save money. I would always recommend you do your own research to evaluate it and not just solely look at one video, because every person is going to have a different experience. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough. I'm really excited to open this thing up and see what it can do.
The Long Array 5 was packaged super well. The instructions were really good, and even the parts were separated for each part of assembly, which made it really smooth. Something that really surprised me was they call it dual beam technology, but it can cut through 20 millimeters solid wood. So theoretically, you could make your own MDF kits with this thing. So that's something I might need to try out. As far as safety goes, there's a fire detector and alarm system so that you don't have to worry about fires or anything like that. I still wouldn't leave this thing unmonitored, but it's just another safety precaution. The other nice thing is it has a bump detector so that if you're in the middle of a cut and a child, maybe mine, runs into the table, it'll stop the cut and then it won't ruin the piece. I've already used that feature and I can say that it works pretty good. The laser is a special laser too. It's kind of set apart from other laser cutters. It cuts super thin. When I was cutting my first piece, it was so thin I wasn't quite sure it was cutting anything. When I held it up to the light, though, I could see it cut all the way through, and I was really shocked. It does a really good job because it's so thin, keeping everything in place. Even if things did shift mid-cut, they wouldn't shift all that much because of how thin the cuts were. Now I'm going to get to the one flaw that I had with this machine. It runs with a micro SD card, and in my experience, micro SD cards are just way too small. It really should be a USB port. That's something I would recommend. So the machine came with a couple test boards just to make sure that the laser was working. I laser cut a compass and the longer logo, and the first thing I engraved, it worked perfectly. It worked straight out of the box. I went ahead and tested out my material as well as the files. It took a while to figure out how to format my files because it wasn't really explained well or at all in the manual or in any of the digital content. I had to figure things out through some third-party sources. The way I recommend running a machine like this is cautiously. So instead of turning my laser full power and trying to get through this foam in one cut, I instead went kind of at a medium power and I just let it cut 3 or 4 times. As long as the origin point stays the same, you can just run that same cut over and over again, and that will help you kind of sneak up on the cut, as well as you can kind of use that same setting on different materials that are similar densities. Both the foams worked good for this, but when I got to the serial cardboard at the end, I did have to change things up. But I was able to keep things consistent through the foam and just change the amount of passes I went over them. Also, another really cool thing is the build plate for this machine is 15 inches by 15 inches. So you have a lot of space to work with. And I think it would be interesting to have a build that kind of fills out this entire area. So let me know if you have any suggestions for that, because that would be really cool.
All right, so I have my first test piece all figured out. This was really educational, and I learned a lot. I was really scared that the foam wouldn't cut. I saw a lot of images online. This foam core doesn't have the paper cover on either side, and so because of that, it didn't have to blow through that paper and then just kind of annihilate the foam underneath. Now that I kind of have this material figured out, I'm gonna do the official build of the video, and we're gonna test out some EVA foam for the timbers. I'm gonna recut out the walls in foam core, and then I'm gonna do shingles and serial cardboard. Something to note is there's a leveling gauge to make sure that the laser is focused. Whenever the material changes thicknesses, you wanna make sure you use this, I think, for each thickness. So I'm going to be doing that every time just to make sure that the laser's dialed in.
First, I blue tack my material in, and then I put in the SD card and I turn on the machine, select my file, and then I'm going to click frame. This will outline the border of the cut file. And then you can adjust your material if it's off or crooked to make sure that you save as much waste as possible. Then you let it cut out, and I cut mine through, I think, 3 times for the foam core at the power level I was going with, and I was able to just pop it right out right after that, and it was great. There was one side where I think the table is a little uneven, and so I did have to go in with an X-Acto blade and help that part of the cut out. But you can see that the cut is super clean. It's even cleaner than if I did it with an X-Acto knife. Now I'm grabbing the EVA craft foam, and I frame it out as well. I adjust the height with the height gauge to make sure that the laser is focused, and then I went over the EVA foam with a couple passes as well. I did notice at this part where I could adjust the power level mid-run, so if it wasn't cutting all the way through, I could up the power level instead of having to go through several passes of cuts. So that's something nice for you to know. I was weeding out the pieces here. I instinctually went from the inside out, and I probably should have weeded the outside and then weeded out the inside. That way, the structural integrity of the pieces weren't being ripped because they're pretty delicate and thin. Then I just glued it onto the foam core board and glued them together. I mitered each end of the foam core where it's being glued to the foam core at a 45-degree angle. That way it met pretty flush with the details, and it looked like that the timber was a beam rather than a 1x2, if that makes sense. I put in some of the scraps from the offcuts of the EVA foam, and then I put in a ladder and glued it right in. We're gonna go into some detailing here. I got some coffee stir sticks to outline the roof, and then I'm just finishing it off here just kind of demonstrate it. After that, I put in some floorboards to kind of suggest that there's a support in the middle layer, and then I coated the second level with some wood planking. I just did that with coffee stir sticks too, and it looked pretty convincing. I did kind of drench this with some white glue, that way it stuck and it was pretty permanent.
So I just finished scratch building. Now I'm gonna get back into laser cutting. I gotta cut all these shingles. Shingles are always a headache. And if I can make these faster than I can cut them by hand, that's gonna save me so much time. And so we're gonna test out serial board now. These are like my 3 main materials that I use. So if I can cut all 3 of these materials, I would say that a laser cutter for me is a good investment.
So I pulled out the serial cardboard, and this is kind of where the project hit a bit of a standstill. I tried to use the same mindset and method that I did with the foam, where I just let the laser do several passes of a light power level, and this just didn't work. Eventually, I remembered that the files on the micro SD card had a reference guide for all the materials, and once I realized that, I plugged in those power levels and the movement speed, and I think I did a couple passes with that and it worked great. After I finally got all those printed, I added a bit more structure to the roof, and then I started laying my shingles. While I lay my shingles, I think I'm gonna thank my Patreon members real quick. Leroy, Moonbad, Fetter, Caracol, Old School FRP, Burning Heart Custom Creations, Jared, James, and Anders. Thank you guys so much. Your support is so much help to the channel, and it really helps motivate me to get things done. So I appreciate you guys so much. I do think I ended up cutting these shingles a bit too small, but it was a really good test for, I don't know, like the dexterity of this machine to see how small it could cut. And it's always good to know the limits of a machine, and I definitely wasn't even near close to pushing their limits on this. So I'm gonna, next week, I'm gonna experiment a little more with what this machine can do. I think it's good to compare a machine with another machine. The other machine that's really similar to this that I've used is a Cricut, and a Cricut obviously uses a blade, so it's significantly different than a laser. But the Cricut was always a hassle to pull out, and it wasn't as straightforward as the laser is. I do think the laser has a leg up on a Cricut machine, and I think it basically does a large majority of the same functions. If you're considering getting one, I would recommend you lean towards the laser cutter, because I think it's a little more versatile on the things that it can cut. Cricut can only cut something that's so thin. This has the opportunity to cut wood and stuff like that. So, especially in this hobby, having things that can cut out windows and things like that adds a lot of potential to your scratch building needs. I would recommend getting a machine like this for sure. Let's get into painting. So I like to prime my buildings tan, and I don't typically coat my buildings with Mod Podge, mostly because I think it's free weathering if something melts slightly. Maybe I'm just pretty lucky because I live in California where it's pretty dry, but spray paint doesn't typically affect my models, and maybe it's just the way I spray because I spray pretty far away and I shake my cans pretty well. But I haven't had any catastrophic failures. So until then, I probably won't be coating my models. I coated everything with a black wash, and this is just going to establish some shadows for us. And I just dab off the excess, and it does a pretty good job of giving some variety to that base coat. After that, I went in with some brown for all the wood. I went over all the shingles because those will be a wood underneath the green, and I went ahead and did the back of the roof as well because that's a pretty main feature. I went around and did all the timbers and the wood structures, as well as the wood planks, just to make sure that everything was consistent. Then I go in and start varying up my colors. All my roofs that I do on all my Mordheim builds are green, just so that they look like they could be together. Now that all the base coats are there, I wanted to establish some variance in those base coats. So I mixed a cream color and I decided to sponge all of this paint on, and I really loved the texture that came through it. There was some green in the sponge as well that kind of leaked through the cream color, and as I was dabbing it on, it kind of mixed together and added a really nice texture. So the edges that I couldn't get to with the sponge, I just went in with the brush and stippled out the edges and kind of feathered it in, and then wiped away any of the excess paint that went onto the browns. This door is a door I designed as an STL for my Patreon members. They have early access to this building accessories STL pack. So if you are interested in grabbing that STL pack early, it's only $2 a month.
All right, so this project turned out really fantastic. I am really happy with how this thing cut materials. Obviously, I was a little cautious this episode because I'm kind of wetting my feet a little bit with this machine. But everything I threw at it, it did. And I was really kind of blown away with everything. I can't really fault it in any way. It does everything it says, and I'm really happy with it. If I paid full price for this, I would be very happy with this. If you're interested in this machine, you can find the link in the description with the promo code. If you're interested in making these files, then you can grab these on Patreon without being a Patreon member. They're free. Whether you want to laser cut it or you want to cut these out by hand, I think if you were to evaluate whether you would prefer to have this laser cutter, I would say you try cutting all this stuff out by hand, and I think by the end of it, all of us will want it. If you enjoyed this video, support the people who support the channel, because I really appreciate them. Thank you, Z-Banks, and thank you, Longer Ray 5. And I hope to see you in the next episode. Feel free to subscribe and do all that stuff. All right, have a good one.